Mary Kouyoumdjian, welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Thank you for having me.
So you have a big premiere coming up at the Prototype Festival, um, which I think is really exciting. What can you tell us? I mean, the great thing about world premieres is you get to be the first person to tell us what an audience might be experiencing or what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm extremely excited. This is an opera called Adoration, and it's my first opera. I've never worked this deeply in this particular form of music making, but I'm extremely excited, and it's been my life for the past 5 years. It's been a long time in the making. And Adoration is it's an adaptation of a film that maybe you or some of your viewers have seen by the same name by filmmaker Atom Egoyan. And the plot of it is essentially there's a high school boy, Simon, who appropriates a real life news story. This is actually the Hindawi affair, in which in 1986, someone planted a bomb on his pregnant fiance's suitcase as she was flying to Tel Aviv. And Simon appropriates the story and convinces his classmates that this is about his own parents. And as we are watching it, we know that his parents died of a car accident, but this social experiment that he has really reveals a lot of racism and complexities, both in his family and in the larger community. So it's hard. It's a hard story, but we're very excited to tell it. And it feels especially relevant given our unfortunate, timely global events that just continue to happen over and over and over again.
Now, as somebody who spent 5 years working on this particular piece, do you see that confluence of current events and this world premiere being an advantage or a burden?
I think uh, a little of both. I think it's an advantage in that I hope that it's 90 minutes in which the community that will happen to see this next week has time to just think. I think it's really hard to just have 90 minutes to think and reflect that's not interrupted by other things. We certainly don't offer any solutions to what's going on right now because I don't know how one possibly could, especially in 90 minutes. But also, it is a disadvantage because the story isn't specifically about what's happening right now. It just happens to pull from a tale as old as time in which these types of conflicts have been going on for centuries and this kind of racism has been happening for, we all know. But at the core of it, it's really about a grieving family. And if anyone has experienced grief, we all know that this brings out the best and the worst in people around you as you're grieving. So it's
Yes,
incredibly
and
complicated and personal in a family way.
well, and it should be noted that we're having this conversation on the same day where there was another school shooting in America in Iowa. So whether that grief is based in the Middle East and what's going on there, or it's based in a small town in Iowa, Perry,
Yeah.
Iowa, that kind of grief is the same. That's the one thing I guess we all forget is that grief is universal.
Yes. Yeah. I know we never talk about it. We don't want to talk about it, but it's the most universal experience we all share.
So what are the challenges for you musically in making grief a palatable emotion for the audience, but not one that sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better way of putting it, suffocates them under the weight of that grief?
Yeah. Um, oh, that's hard to answer because I don't know how palatable it is in this particular piece. I really, I mean, a little background to this is I had started writing this opera before the pandemic and before the world had shut down. And that version of this opera felt incredibly polite. So I scrapped it all to have, I wouldn't say an impolite version of the opera, but one that maybe is a little well, can be a little more difficult to sit through because I think that grief and conversations around racism are uncomfortable. And I'm a strong believer that discomfort in the arts actually prompts conversation, because when we feel discomfort, we want less of it in our world. So, I don't know actually exactly how to answer that, other than I think it is a hard one to sit through for a constructive purpose, but I think it will be 90 challenging minutes for the audience.
Do you think it's important for you as an artist to provide some sense of relief at the end of it? Or do you want people to experience it and come to their own way of accepting and passing through it?
Yeah, it's more the latter. I don't aim to offer relief because, again, I think if you leave people with relief, then they're less, the piece is less inclined to foster a community that is more inclined to do direct change. I would never say that this opera will launch direct change, but I think the hope that myself and other artists have is that the audience is more ready to. But my main goal is to spark empathy, because once we connect with a character or just any human being on that fundamental human level, and we have more understanding, then I think we can more readily accept the uncomfortable.
Having been through my own numerous, encounters with grief, far too numerous, I think. I always think of it as a sparse, almost isolating thing. Even though I'm surrounded by other people who are going through grief, none of us goes through the grief the same way. So musically, when you're writing a piece like this, I know you have a number of artists who are singing and a string quartet, I
Mhm.
believe is. So is this all written for string quartet and voices? And is that part of your expression of grief, is sort of the sparseness perhaps of the music?
Ah, um, I'm not sure it's exactly sparse though. So there are singers. There are six singers. There is a string quartet amplified with some processing. And then for the entire 90 minutes, there's an electronic soundscape that's also an equal player to the live performers on stage. So sonically, it's quite dense. But one of the challenges of this piece, one of the many challenges, because Atom Egoyan writes incredibly complex stories where each character goes through immense psychological change, for better or worse, and is incredibly layered. And I still feel like every time I go into the story, I'm learning new things about the characters. But one of the one of the wonderful things that he's done is that as we explore each character, they each grieve in their own individual way, and the things that they're grieving are incredibly different, whether it's people or circumstance. So that has allowed a lot of different ways to explore this incredibly universal area. It also has meant that over the course of the 90 minutes, people's relationship to grief also changes quite a lot. So, oh, here he is. Hi, Alfie. This is Alfie, my dog. Um, but yeah, it's hard though. It's really hard. It's also meant 5 years of really sitting with those different kinds of grief as well, which is very tricky to
What,
do.
and I will get to that in a minute. But since you have six different people in the story experiencing different forms of grief, is that expressed differently for each one of them musically or sonically?
Yeah, I mean, each character has an incredibly different energy that they bring to the story. The characters being, we have this high school boy who at the core of it is grieving his mother and father who died of very unfortunate random events. And we have his grandfather who is mourning his daughter and is looking for a place to put blame for her loss. We have characters who come from Lebanon who are also grieving home. So there are many different forms of it, and it would be difficult to articulate how one character responds to it because it changes so much from moment to moment and piece to piece.
And you have some amazingly talented people in this. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I know Mark Kudish from Broadway, but I've also seen him in contemporary opera. And, not only is he amazingly talented, but he's incredibly smart. And I would
Yeah.
assume that must be a great collaborator to have as part of your team.
Yeah, he and all of the cast members, it's been a really surreal experience because they all have been a part of the process since I was just nearing the final draft of this. So there were opportunities for input and for conversation around character and even things that they wanted out of their characters and things that they saw that maybe they didn't see in the film or the first pass of the full opera. So it's felt pretty collaborative, especially now that we've been rehearsing this for a few weeks now and workshopping things and are learning new things about the characters as we go along. So that's been really incredible. I don't think that's every experience. Again, this is my first opera, but I feel like it's not everyone's experience that the cast is that invested in the psychological trajectory of a character and really building the character that deeply versus just performing it as it's written and accepting the character for what it is on the page. So I feel very, very lucky for their contributions.
Now, are you the kind of composer who will make changes based on that collaboration you have, with your singers? And, is the piece fully locked and finished at this point?
Well, at this point it is because it's opening in a week. Yeah, it's a really tricky balance. One, because I have sat with this piece for 5 years now, that every single sonic moment is there because of a million micro decisions and a lot of intent and a lot of conversation with my collaborators prior to casting. So in that sense, it already had its identity and there wasn't a lot of flexibility for that. Also, the nature of the technology is it's a 90-minute fixed electronic track. So there isn't a lot of space if we need like maybe another aria. I'm just like, no, I can't. Like it's fixed, it's locked in. But there's been flexibility as we've been discovering the parts of can we rework some lines so that if the intent is to get this through, then I need to do this differently with my particular voice. And that's been really, really wonderful because they're all acting now. That's all I want is, yes, be an amazing singer, but also really act the part.
Well, when you have somebody like, Naomi Louisa O'Connell, you don't have to worry about having great singers, do you?
Oh my God, she's amazing. Amazing. Yeah, she did so much research into her part too, even before my first meeting with her. She's truly extraordinary. The amount of preparation and planning and understanding of a role. And then again, her millions of micro decisions that she makes for each little inflection of her voice is all completely full of intent.
Now, a 5-year journey in this subject matter seems like something that would be very intense to experience. And I know this isn't 5 years, 365
Yeah.
days a year. You're not working 8 or 10 hours a day
Yeah.
on
No
this.
way. I'm not
But
that composer. No.
and nor do you want to be,
No,
probably.
I certainly don't.
But how do you protect yourself as a person when you're spending this much time on this kind of material?
Yeah. That has changed over the years. It's hard. I tend to work in very intense bursts and I tend to leave things for long periods of time. It's hard for me to do a little bit of writing every day for a project like this because I think that um, the psychological intensity of all of these characters and of the larger narrative is so demanding that to just pop in here and there doesn't seem to serve the purpose of the work. So I'll sort of binge write for a while and then I will either move to something else or I love not writing. I really like any student of mine knows if there's a summer break or a winter break or whatever, I say, please don't write, just recharge because it's really, really important to do other human activity in order to find any kind of energy to in brain space to be creative.
Having never written an opera before, what was the impetus to make this particular story your, entree into writing opera? And are you happy as an opera composer?
Yes, but I'm tired. um, yeah, yes, I am happy. It is challenging over so many years. I've now had couple projects like this that like other theatrical works, not necessarily opera, that have taken like 5 or 6 years to do. And I think the greatest challenge is that by the time you're done, you're really not the same person, both musically and also just as a human as you were when you started. So my musical language is very different than when I started, and my interests and even just uh, interest in general, like how do you find ways to engage with material over that long of time is really challenging. Um, but yeah, I think I quite enjoy it a lot. I think it's something not everyone knows about me is I started composition not for concert music, but for film. And I left that because I don't feel that I work well with the way that the film industry chooses to collaborate with composers. It feels very business transactional rather than
You mean
not
you
all
want
the time.
you want more than 6 weeks to write a score?
Oh, 6 weeks would be amazing.
I know. I was being generous.
Yeah. And I do write for film currently, but with filmmakers who I know and trust, and we have a very wonderful collaboration. But that interest in composition all came from storytelling, like direct storytelling, and the music serving to present the psychological trajectory of characters. So in that way, I feel very at home in opera.
Does it inspire you to want to do more opera?
Yes, after a break. Yes.
Well,
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
let's talk about your year, because it's not like you have a quiet year. I mean, I believe you've got a major, debut with the New York Philharmonic in May.
I
Uh,
do. Yeah.
a musical documentary, I believe it's called. Uh,
Yes.
so, is that at a place where it's locked, or are you still working on that because you have time between now and May?
I have a little nugget of time, but yes, yes, I am working on that. Yeah, that's a project that I'm doing in collaboration with this amazing photojournalist, Scout Kouyoumdjian. She's done a lot of war photography. She was the primary photographer with Obama for both terms of his presidency. And she and I went to Armenia last May to document, at that time, the after effects of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, which affected what Armenians call Artsakh, which is more formally known as Nagorno-Karabakh, or right now, not even known as that. Right now, it's just known as Azerbaijan. So we went to document that and gathered interviews and gathered photography. And since then, earlier this fall, that territory experienced a massive genocide and displacement of all of the Armenians, and now that belongs to Azerbaijan. So the project sort of adapted, but the idea is that while the New York Philharmonic is playing, her photography that has documented this displacement will be projected, and I have field recordings and interviews, both that I've taken and also that have been contributed by amazing activists on the ground in Armenia, and those will be narrating the piece.
Do you think of yourself as a political composer, or is the act of composition in and of itself a political act?
I think both. I think both. Um, yeah, I mean, I love how you phrase the latter, and just the act of creation, whether it's in your identity or the choice to make something or the choice of where it's presented. All of these things are inherently political, which is what I tell my music history students all the time. Like, don't for a minute think that Beethoven isn't political. Forget even the Eroica Symphony, just the act of what, the act of what a composer is doing, of who they are, of when, how, who funded, all of these things end up being political. For a long time, I used to think that, or I used to say that I wasn't a political composer, but I was just interested in telling true stories. But yes, I mean, with so much political conflict, especially things that are affecting my family, my community so close to home, 1000%. Yes, I think I feel incredibly lucky to live in a country in which there's very little consequence for speaking out. And we do have, for the most part, freedom of expression, at least compared to other places and other communities. So I take that responsibility and privilege very seriously.
Do you think there's a trade-off for having that kind of freedom in the absence of government funding of the arts?
Oh, that's great. Oh, can we talk about that for 3 minutes? Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, it would be amazing just to have some kind of government funding, but I think that isn't that interesting how we don't have government funding and also the government doesn't always want us to speak out. Um,
And the government doesn't want to support artists having the economic means to be able to do so.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's easier to be a composer in other countries in the world, isn't it?
Yep, sure is. Yeah, and also more difficult. I mean, I feel like we're in a little middle space of that spectrum here in the United States.
Now I mentioned, a few moments ago that you have a busy year because, it's not enough that you have a premiere with the New York Philharmonic in May. You have the Kronos Quartet playing a new piece, I believe, in June,
Yes,
as part of their 5 decade series.
yes.
And I know you've collaborated with Kronos previously as well. What makes you and Kronos a good combination, do you think, from your
Oh,
point of view?
I mean, it sounds so cheesy, but I think it's just because we love each other so much. I really do. I really do. I think, anyone who's worked with them or even just admired them from not knowing them personally knows that there's a lot of love that goes in that group and a lot of authenticity in what they choose to explore. But I don't know. I met Kronos Quartet. I was like a little baby. I met them at 29 and as part of their under 30 project. And at that point, they had already been shaping the way I think of composition and music and music production since, just growing up, buying their albums. So that felt organic to me, if not incredibly lucky. Um, and we've kept a very close relationship and have worked on a number of projects now. And we actually just this last December recorded our first, well, my first album and our first album together, really celebrating the past decade plus of work that we've done together.
And when is that album coming out?
I don't know. It's not private. Like I can tell you because we've been posting, little clips of the recording session, but I don't know. In a way, hopefully soon, but also I don't feel that it necessarily needs to be rushed. I know that it's coming out at some point. I'm excited for it.
Well,
And it'll be
Kronos records for none such, don't they?
I think that they used to primarily, but now they've been working with a number of different labels.
Okay.
So this will
So
be
we
with Phonotypic Records.
okay, so we
Reaching out
can't
with
blame
them.
anyone. We can blame one label, but not none such
Yes.
on this one.
No,
Now,
they've
now,
been really wonderful. It's a new label and they've been absolutely fantastic and made us feel right at home creating the work.
now, throughout this conversation, you've talked about your students, and I know that being a teacher, is very important to you. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be part of Mizzou's, um,
Oh yeah.
you know, International Composers Festival in July.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm wondering, what do you learn most from the students you teach or the students you experience in something like this Composers Festival?
Oh, geez, so many things. Um, Gosh, teaching exposes so many different things. There's all the different sides. So there's what the students bring to the table and their own experiences, their own interests, the ways that they're choosing to express themselves, and the, I think, the incredible gift of watching someone either already know their artistic purpose or begin to figure out their artistic purpose. And I say that not as like the end all be all. Our artistic purpose evolves from moment to moment and time to time. But that is extremely gratifying and also makes me as an educator and a composer reevaluate mine too as they're discovering theirs. But I think also, composition is such a can be such a solitary thing. And as a composer, I'm not articulating my decision making very often, but in lessons, students are articulating their decision making all the time. And that's teaching me to put words to some of my choices and question some of my choices in a really, really beautiful way. But it's incredibly hard, like the balance of teaching. I don't know one composition teacher or any creative teacher for that matter that has figured out a good balance between their creative work and teaching, because either you're charged by teaching or it can pull away sometimes, as creative work can either charge you or pull away sometimes. So I'm still figuring that out. Is I love creative work, I love education, but it's hard to find a consistent balance between the two that always works.
Does it give you optimism about the future where music might be headed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, whether that's in teaching or any concert hall or any performance that I'm seeing, I think just the fact that people are creating, especially as the world just really seems to become more and more complex and hard to navigate, that people still choose to create and bring community together, is incredibly optimistic.
So you're bringing community together through the world premiere of Adoration, through your concert with the New York Philharmonic, through your work with Kronos, and through your work as an instructor. What do you think this year is going to let the world know about who you are? And what can we understand about who you are as a person and as a composer through these various works that you're going to be springing on the world?
That's a good question. Do I have an answer for that? Because each project is very different. Um, but I think consistently with all of these projects, the topics have been very difficult and big. And I get very excited by that. The more complex the topic or the story, the more excited I am to explore it. And I don't know if everyone knows that about me yet, that I tend to lean into that, and I'm not afraid to say difficult things, but it all comes through a place of wanting people to connect and spark empathy around topics that tend not to invite it all the time.
And at some point, maybe you'll give yourself a break and, write something very facile
Oh
and
yeah. Oh,
simple.
1000%. Oh, I have palette cleanser pieces all the time. I love doing that. Oh gosh, yeah. Something that even isn't programmatic or just like you're just exploring sound for sound. It's so important just for artistic growth, even to have little experiments like that.
Well, this conversation just gives me one more reminder of why I wish I could be at the Prototype Festival.
Oh, I wish you were here too, at least to
I'm
meet you
based
in
in
person.
Los Angeles, so it's a little tough. It's a
Oh,
little tough, but quite a few of Beth Morrison projects end up at in conjunction with LA Opera at Red Cat here. So hopefully, Adoration will be one of them.
that would be lovely.
Well, thank
Oh,
you very much for your time. I know you have a rehearsal to get to.
thank you, Craig.
Are you all
Thank
right
you.
with my posting our conversation
Yes,
online?
absolutely. Thank you. I'm very glad that he didn't squeak all the way through it.
I
So,
didn't hear him squeak at all on this end. So,
good, good. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you and for the very thoughtful questions and the research too. It doesn't always happen, so I really very much appreciate it.
well,